Been living in these woods for 11 years, having moved up from the city where I lived for 15 years, actually grew up in, and I found the change to be pretty profound. I was always a city person, and I guess I was just ready to leave the city. It was just time. And Peter and I found this land and built this house. We both have large studios to work in. And the nature of my imagery began to change, I guess, predictably. Previously, I'd been very married to the icons of religious imagery. I would explore concepts of Christ in the rink as a boxer, the ascension from the cross, the descension from the cross, in fairly subversive ways. But it was figurative work, and it was recognizable work, as experimental as some of the color and compositions were. Spent years doing Christ in the boxing rink, the descension, the resurrection, in very, very dark, dark ways. Lots of glaze. The bodies would be cut up so you couldn't quite tell what was going on. When Christ was in the boxing rink, you couldn't tell if he was winning or losing. The audience behind him wasn't sure what was happening either. And that went on for years and years and years.
And so this is actually wonderful to see what she's been able to do over the relatively short period of time and transform of her artistic um, talent and her thoughts and her ideas and spontaneity into something which speaks so much to me.
Living up here and with that lake, with the island in it, sort of opened me up to something in a way deeper that was harder to paint. Also, the lack of fear, having lived in a really dangerous place in Brooklyn, has given me a lot more energy and a different quality of energy for painting. So after working and coming home and being glad to get home in one piece, the things I would tend to paint would be rather violent. Um, and not that it's not violent in nature, the wind can't be violent, water can't be violent. Doing the figure is so much easier than what I'm doing now, which is looking at light and water and making them into a unified field on a two-dimensional surface that still has color, tone, blur, but enough resonance for someone to find something to pin a response to.
This is my favorite painting of Greta's. I first saw it in New York, and it was just framed like this in two parts. And I thought, this is totally amazing. And then I knew that she was Peter's wife and she was here in Amherst, and that I had a chance to actually see more of her stuff.
Response to. And it's a constant process of looking, and not just looking with your eyes as you would, as a painter would to do a realistic composition, but to look beyond those details and to get the larger whole of how does the air and the water and the light work together to make an image that we perceive through our eyeballs that then can translate through paint onto a two-dimensional surface and still have the depth that the real world does.
I think the format that she's chosen for these larger works somehow liberates you to be able to expand your own conceptions of what you're seeing so that you have a certain impression that you get, but you can then work on that on your own and read into it what you feel is important. And that's very individual.
My palette changed. I work with maybe 9 colors now. And I use no earth tones, oddly enough. I can't stand raw sienna, raw umber, burnt sienna. The earth tones just don't work. My mother was an amateur painter. I loved coming home and smelling the oils. And she could have been pretty good had she stuck with it. And I was always attracted to painting because I grew up in a very strict Norwegian Lutheran environment in, of all places, Yonkers, New York, where I went to church 5 times a week.
The bottom of it is a copper leaf and laid over, and it is in our house, and we look at it every day. It is changing with every light of the day. And in the morning, I see something entirely different than at night. And in the different lights, I see different things. I think what it really reflects is my own feelings and thoughts and moods of the day. And maybe tomorrow I'll see something very different that I see today.
And during all those hours and hours of sitting on wooden pews in the church, which was rented, so we at least had the luxury of stained glass windows, I would just space out on all those stupid words that were being said and look at the light coming through the stained glass window and watch how it would change the image of the crucifixion or the angels into something abstract and completely mysterious. And that's what saved me during all those hours of listening to sermons. I tend to make my tones from something called quinacridone, which is a transparent base and a partly synthetic pigment that seems to be able to mix with other colors in ways to produce a hue that is almost natural, but in relationship to all the other hues in the painting, creates something bigger than itself. So color doesn't stand out on its own. The same way you look around here, yes, you could paint that green, or you could try and get whatever the color of the fog and the mist is. How do you do that without being realistic? So I will look at the verticality of these trees, the way they're enveloped by the mist, and try and get rid of the trees, get rid of the green leaves, get rid of the verticality, and just find something that works so that when you leave this place, you remember the sensation of it without being an impressionist, quote unquote. I'm not a wordsmith, and words to me feel arbitrary. And when talking about my own work, it's very difficult. I go to the thesaurus and find the words that seem to make sense to me. Oh, I'm looking for the liminal, I'm looking for the threshold, I'm looking, as I learned from the stained glass windows, how does light and matter pass through each other? And that's what I look to do when I paint. And then I moved up to Amherst, Massachusetts, and started doing skies. And it's just led to this mystical kind of, I hate the word mystical, spiritual, but I don't know what else to say, involvement with light and matter, which has been my pursuit from the very beginning as a child looking through the stained glass windows. So that's where I've been heading, and the whole lifestyle of not having a full-time job anymore, of being able to be receptive to the incredibly small changes that happen in the weather and have that affect how you see what you think you're seeing. There are times when working the way I do with oil paint, which is so subtle in terms of color and tone, that it's very helpful to return to black and white of drawing. And then the question becomes what to draw. For some reason, with graphite, I need an actual object. So I played around with birds' nests because, again, the twin issue comes up. And there just had to be two of them. One didn't work. There had to be two. And the bird's nests became very integral to the medium that I'm using, which is powdered graphite, which I apply with a cotton ball and then use erasers to sort of sculpt out the image, and then at the very end use pencil point to make, it's like the cylindrical force of the bird's nest. I've got to be in touch with that as I'm working, and then have the little tendrils of those little sticks and twigs just come out. And I like this technique because it leaves room for a lot of accidents. You can't really control it. Sometimes I like to work in very, very dark and have the image come out of the dark. Otherwise, it's just the image in the light. And this is actually not real paper. It's 100% polypropylene. So it's a plastic substance that absorbs this powdered graphite almost to a quality of a charcoal drawing. There's always a little bit of something, a little spooky in my work, because it's not what you think it is. You don't really know what it is. But it's not Christ being beaten up in the boxing rink. Um, and then little things happen like trying to tame the pet wild turkeys. They're not pets yet, they probably never will be. But they leave these gorgeous feathers everywhere, and now I've been drawing just little wisps of their feathers in a way that looks like feathers, but hopefully it doesn't just look like a drawing of a feather. So in other words, once you start looking in any environment, in the city I would find other things that would inspire an image for a painting, but here are the little things kind of make me laugh, because 15 years ago I would never have thought I would be working in this genre at all. I didn't think that the notion of quiet, mystery, undercurrents would obsess me as they do, and the big challenge of how to find an image to accurately translate my experience of being alive in the world into a painting. That's it for now.